For reference, I'm a female in my late 20s, and about a week ago, I had an unsettling encounter. The city I live in is surrounded by reserved land set aside by the city planners, which is a forest of pine trees. I usually walk my dogs up in the area closest to me, which is about a 10-minute walk from the middle of town. It's one of my favorite places to go to, but now I'm really nervous about going in the area alone. The city is usually very safe, and I've never had any concerns out by myself, even in the dark, and I've been in the forest when it's dark many times with no incident. The track where I access the forest is at the top of a dead-end street, through a park with a playground, and up a long series of steps. It's quite secluded. I have 2 dogs, an older one and a 1-year-old. They're a working breed, so very high energy. Although the older one is now arthritic and doesn't need much exercise, but the younger one needs a huge amount of off-leash exercise daily, which is why I was out on this particular evening. The older dog is also very shy and has a nervous disposition. It was after work in the winter, so the sun had just gone down. It was also bad weather, nearly a storm and raining, although the trees shelter you from most of the rain. I get into the forest and I let my dogs off of the leash. We met a couple of other people also with high energy dogs along the way. As I was walking along one of the tracks, my dogs were up ahead running up and down the banks at the sides of the track, and I noticed up ahead there was a man sitting on a seat. I could see that he was dressed in dark blue track pants and a leather jacket over a hooded jersey, head down staring at the ground. His hood was up and I couldn't see his face. He was just sitting there in the rain, and I immediately got bad vibes from him. I try to shake it off as just someone out for a walk, but I decide to stay alert just in case. A few minutes later, the older dog looked back at something behind me and then just bolted, clearly spooked, running in the direction of the playground. I'd never seen her run away like that before, and the younger dog ran right after her. I yelled for her to come back, but she was gone. The younger one comes back when I called, but keeps running up ahead and back like he can't decide who to go with. That's when I look behind me, and I see the same man a little bit further behind me. I start to get really nervous about the weird man, but more about my dog who's now run away from me. The track I am on makes a large loop before ending back at the playground, but the track below led straight back, so I quickly climb down the bank onto the lower track and start hurrying after my dog. Not running because I have a ruined back, but walking as fast as I can. The track is muddy and slippery, so it's slow going. By this time, it's gotten pretty dark out. When I get near to the steps, I see both dogs just sitting there, and they come running up, very excited to see me. Relieved, I turn around, and the man is right behind me. He had to have run or followed me down the bank to get there so quickly. I realize that I really need to get back to a populated area, and I head down the steps as fast as my back will let me. When I get to the bottom of the steps, I put the dogs back on the leash, and the younger dog starts growling for the first time in his life. I glance back. The man is now halfway down the steps, and when he sees me, he suddenly stops and proceeds to tie his shoes. I keep looking at him with my dog still growling. He shoots me a long, angry look, then turns around and walks back up the steps into the darkness of the forest. Nothing bad actually happened, but it really got my adrenaline pumping, and I can only guess what might have happened if I didn't have my dogs with me. At least the younger one, because the older one was absolutely useless with protection. I'm just really glad nothing actually happened. Last summer, I was camping with my partner and our 30-pound dog along a creek in a popular area in a nearby national forest. It was an established site, but not a campground. It had a parking spot, fire ring, and a nice flat area with access to the creek. Dead of night, we're woken up by a large truck parked by our car, just idling. Eventually, 3 men get out of the car. They enter our camp. They're talking quietly, and the truck in the creek makes us unable to hear what they're saying. I'm pretty sure it's not good. Meanwhile, our dog has been growling lowly the whole time. Early on, I whispered to my partner to be quiet, hold the dog, and hide. I got out of our sleeping bag and I put my shoes on. The only thing that I had for defense was a forest axe, halfway between hatchet and axe. Very useful for getting by in the woods. It had a leather sheath with a metal button latch to protect the blade. They took their time, perhaps as intimidation. I loudly popped the metal button from the latch, taking the sheath off, preparing to use the axe if need be. All three of them heard the latch. My assumption is they thought it was a gun holster, quickly left the camp, and then got in their truck and left without a word. So yeah, to those creepy guys who showed up to our camp to do God knows what in the middle of the night, I'm really glad to have not met you, and I hope I never do. So this happened to a couple of friends and me about 6 years ago. It was the first summer we were all back from college. We were being hooligan kids who had each gotten into weed a little bit in college. We decided to go to the state park near my one friend's house late at night and smoke. For the sake of the story, I'll give a bit of layout. We parked at the end of this dead end on a wooden road where a path started that led into the park from the back. This park is heavily wooded with a lake and some recreational areas on the side with the main entrance. The path we were on went parallel to the edge of a large field with a couple of yards of trees in between. A little ways down there was a small gap to access the field. We had stopped in the big field next to the tree line near the gap that led back to the path that we walked in on. There was a rock there, and my one friend began to use it to prepare the fun stuff. It was a really cloudy night, and the only things that we could see were what we lit up with our phones. After a couple of minutes, we hear something moving in the trees down a bit further, maybe 30 feet-ish away. I've always been overly paranoid and instantly went to the worst, but my friends figured it was just a squirrel. A minute later, we hear it again, now closer and louder. I begin to say, "Sounds kinda heavy. You think it's a deer?" More to calm myself down. Maybe, one of them says. That's when the sound began to pick up. We all froze and put away our lights. We had all grown up in wooded areas and spent a lot of time hiking and whatever else. We know what it sounds like when someone is walking in the woods, or at least what it might sound like. If it was a person that were walking slowly still, but were way closer than I'd have preferred. That's what really got me too. What animal would walk towards people? I got a surge of anxiety and kinda blurted out, "It sounds like a person." Right on cue, whoever it was starts running right at us through the trees, and one of my friends yells out for us to run. And we do. We started running at full speed across the field of tall grass, and the entire time we hear the guy running behind us. A minute of running brought us to a tall rock dam, and we began to climb, furiously tripping and scrambling over the rocks on the other side and run into the woods that ran next to the road that we had parked on. We got a little ways in and sat together in the dark, absolutely still and silent. We don't hear anything, but don't break our silence or move a muscle for about a half an hour. We then creep through to the edge of the road, unfortunately a ways past my friend's car. After about 5 more minutes of building the courage, we ran to it, waited for my friend to unlock his door so we could unlock the back one, and got the heck out of there. However, when my friend began to back up his car, his headlights lit a little ways into the path in front of us. We caught a shadowed figure of somebody walking right down the path. It had to have been that guy, but I'm just glad we got out of there when we did. Who knows what could have happened. So a few months ago, I was out hiking with my friend. We live in the mountains of western Maryland, and we were about 6 miles into an 8-mile loop that we have done frequently when we decided to take some pictures and eat a snack at a summit. This area of the trail had a park, benches and tables, and a parking lot. We were sitting and talking, and I noticed a man just walking around the parking lot all alone. He was walking aimlessly and staring at his feet. What confused me was that he was in jeans and a button-down shirt. Not exactly the right attire for hiking. We decide to set off on the last 2-mile leg of the loop. This part goes downhill to the headquarters of the park and is cut out of the mountain/bank. The end of that leg is the parking lot where our car is. You don't have a lot of visibility from the trail, and you have to walk in a single file. I was walking in front and talking to my friend. I turn to look at her, and I see the same man right behind her, following at a rudely close distance. I immediately got a gut-wrenching feeling. I noticed that he didn't have any pack or hiking gear, and was not even wearing boots. Something about his eyes really spooked me. So a bit more walking, and he continues to fall very close. I say to my friend that I have to tie my shoe, as a reason to step off the trail and let him pass us, in case he's only following close because he wants to go faster than we are. She immediately catches on to what I'm doing, and we pull over. He looks startled, and she says hello politely. He just stares. This is when I notice that he's carrying a stick. As I'm fiddling with my shoe, she stands between us and he passes us. We wait to give him some distance ahead of us, but he immediately slows down. We wait for a bit longer, and he gets to the furthest part of the trail that has slight lines to us, and he turns around, looking up right at us. We decided that something feels too wrong about this guy, and we don't want to have to pass him a second time. So we turn around and walk back up the trail towards the park with the tables and parking. A few minutes of walking up the trail, I look back and I see him walking up the trail as well. He's following us. I tell my friend to walk faster. We book it up the trail and get to the parking lot area we were at before. We start to strategize and wait, deciding that we will wait to see if he comes back up the trail to the lot. There's more people around this area, so we felt more safer waiting it out. About 20 minutes go by, and nothing. We're talking about how that could mean that he kept going on the trail and is long gone, or is now waiting on the trail where it is more deserted. We see a couple come up from the trail from where we were, presumably taking the loop in the opposite direction that we are. We approach them and ask if they saw anyone on the trail between this lot and the next. They tell us they saw a young man sitting on a rock about halfway down. They describe the man who was following us. We explain our interaction with him to the wife, and we begin to get into a conversation back and forth about whether or not he was a threat. The husband finally interjects and then says, "We need to call a ranger. He wasn't just sitting there. He had a knife and was carving that stick." Needless to say, we called a ranger. The nice couple walked that last leg with us to make sure we got to our car safely, and then even gave us their numbers in case we needed anything. The rangers then walked the trail, but there was no sign of him. I really wish I knew where he went and what happened to him, but I'm glad to know that my instincts are legitimate. Years ago, when I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night, as my friends and I were quite the night owls. We loved the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads or the paths we frequented. Even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in such a rural area, and you could always see and hear them coming from very far away due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicle disrupting the peaceful silence of the night. We were really into it at the time, and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, sometimes not arriving home until the sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads to take one of our favorite hidden routes. It began with a narrow paved path that was the only piece of land separating two sides of a long lake. It would often seek under due to rain, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to use it before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long and was extremely relaxing to ride through due to the scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to continue moving and turn into a very close path that leads directly into a densely wooded wilderness preservation. As we came up to the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny moving ball of dim light down there. It moved so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what exactly it was. Rather than shine our flashlight down, we curiously watched it for a few moments, whispering to each other about what it could possibly be. All at once, that small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds, overwhelming our senses that had become accustomed to the dark and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off path into a very dark, very overgrown hole to the side of a hill, overlooking where we had just come from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the plants in the darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers ride up to where we had originally been standing. There were 4 men, 2 on four-wheelers and 2 on full-size motorcycles. They were yelling at each other about something, but we couldn't make out what they were saying due to the distance we had covered. We felt safe enough to whisper very softly to each other and speculated who these people could be. Our first thought was that maybe they were park rangers of some kind, although we had never seen one here in the many times we had been through, and honestly we doubted that this country had the budget or even the desire to have anyone patrol the deep woods at night. Besides that, these men were on vehicles entirely inappropriate for the paved bike trails, and they were very angry about something. They began to call out to us for a while, yelling things like,
"We know you're out there and we can see you. Come on out."
We stayed silent and decided to call their bluff instead of running. Eventually, we clearly heard one of the men yell out loud,
"Find them now,"
and then smash a bottle. That single moment had erased any hope that we had that these were just park rangers doing their job. We watched them split up, each one of them going a different way down the series of paths on their vehicles, including the path we came from. It took us what felt like ages to even move. We were frozen in fear inside the dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travel through the woods and paths. One of them already coming full circle and passing the point where he started from. I thought about calling for help, but I was too afraid to open my phone in fear that even the smallest amount of light would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach their farthest distance yet, we finally summoned the nerve to get up and try to run somewhere far enough from these people to safely make a call. We ran as hard and as fast as we could through the woods. Since their headlights gave away their location on these paths, we would hide again whenever we felt they were getting too close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woods became less dense, and the fear I felt waiting for them to drive past us while basically only being covered in leaves and plants may still be unmatched to this day. Finally, we emerged from the woods onto the intersection of the 2 main roads, far from where we started. We dug down into the ditch to call for help. When I opened my phone, I noticed I had recent missed calls from one of our other friends, Connor, who we were supposed to meet up with after our longboard excursion. I then called him and frantically asked where he was. Luck was with us again. He hadn't given up on our plans despite us ignoring him and was only a few miles away, already heading in our direction. I gave him the names of the 2 streets we were near the corner of and explained that we needed to be picked up right away. He agreed to speed over to us while Justin and I waited in hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of those men did. We bolted in the backseat of his car, yelling for him to get out of there, and he took off. Relief doesn't begin to describe what I felt being safely driven home that night after everything I had just experienced. After explaining everything that happened to Connor, we ended up just moving on with our night and decided to not call the police. We figured they would be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and that would only be putting ourselves at risk by admitting to breaking the law by taking those paths so late at night. I still have no idea what happened or who those people were. I've been told all kinds of theories from friends and family that have heard this story, but I still don't really know. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the revving started and we couldn't see, both of our minds began to think about a chainsaw. So I suppose it could have been much worse. Frustratingly enough, whatever those men thought we saw that night that made them want to catch us so badly, we never actually saw. I guess we'll never really know what was actually going on there, and I'm not sure if I even want to.
This happened a couple years ago. I wanted to go to the local wildlife trail to walk in the woods. I had gone several times to hike and jog. I normally went with my boyfriend at the time, but he was working when I wanted to go. I decided to go by myself. I felt pretty comfortable going. I parked at the far end of the parking lot in case anyone else showed up. The trail continues straight from the parking lot for about a mile, until it curves up a large hill. Where I wanted to go was the abandoned parking lot with a lake. The turnoff for this part of the trail was about 400 yards down the trail on the left. Once you turn left, you have about 200 yards of flat trail before it inclined. The inclined section is loose gravel, and it's quite noisy when you're walking up it. This section lasts for about 100 yards. I felt pretty at ease going along the straight trail before I turned left. When I hit the incline, I began to feel uneasy. I brushed it off as being overly paranoid and I continued. As I was about halfway up the incline, I began to hear crunching and snapping of trees in the woods to my right. It sounded about 100 yards off to my right. It was just far enough in the woods that I couldn't see what was making the noise. I froze in my tracks and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I stood still as I heard the crunching stop. Stupidly, I brushed it off as a deer or a bobcat. The crunching was too loud to be a raccoon or a squirrel. I continued up the path until I hit the end of the incline. That's when I heard the thing in the woods begin to run at me. I was frozen in fear. My heart was beating 1,000,000 miles an hour. Every hair on my body was standing straight up. I was rooted in place. That's when I saw him. A man was running straight for me while holding something in his right hand. I began to run down the incline back to the main trail. I was slipping and sliding down the gravel. I looked behind me and he was now at the top of the incline. He had this evil look in his eyes. I noticed the item in his hand was a knife. I almost slipped due to me looking back at the man. He called out to me.
Get back here.
His tone was malicious. I sprinted as fast as I could and took a hard ride back onto the main path. When I hit the parking lot, I didn't look back. I unlocked my car and started it as quickly as I could. Right as I was backing up, he emerges from the trail entrance. He just stands there, partially covered in the shade of the trees. As I tear through the parking lot and onto the highway, he just stares at me. The biggest, creepiest smile comes across his face. He slowly waves at me as I get onto the highway. I never went back to that trail. That encounter has scarred me for life when it comes to hiking in the woods.
Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. And if you have your own personal scary story, be sure to submit that to my subreddit at reddit.com/r/southerncannibal or to my email at southerncannibal@gmail.com. I'm always looking for new stories. And before we bring this video to a close, I just want to shout out all of my $5 or more patrons, as well as my $3 or more patrons featured on screen. Shout out to Babe Lincoln, Beth A, Kate T, Katrina T, Celeste S, Ellie S, Heather B, Howard R, Jazzy G, Jonathan C, Joseph F, Lori J, Matthew B, Steph L, Tammy S, Terry H, 2Eki for you, and Victor R. Thank all of you so much for supporting me on Patreon. I really appreciate it more than you know. And if any of you would like to join these awesome people and also become a patron, head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/southerncannibal. Thank you everyone, and have a good one. And remember to always stay